Jake Tanner had always been a lone cowboy. He preferred the quiet of the open plains, the sound of his horse's hooves on the rocky ground, and the feeling of freedom that came with being far away from the noise of towns and people. But one hot afternoon as he rode through a narrow canyon, he heard something that made him stop. At first it was soft, a faint cry. But it was enough to make him turn his horse and follow the sound. As he moved deeper into the canyon, he saw a figure lying by the creek, half hidden by the rocks and brush. His heart skipped a beat as he saw it was a young woman, her face dirty and bloodied, her clothes torn. She was barely conscious. Jake's hand immediately went to his rifle, instinctively reaching for protection. The wildlands could be dangerous, and he didn't know if she was a threat or just someone in need of help. But as he got closer, he saw that she wasn't moving much. She seemed to be in pain, and her chest rose and fell weakly. The woman's hair was long, dark, and tangled, and her skin was tanned from the sun, but what caught Jake's attention was her eyes. They were a piercing brown, wide with fear and exhaustion, yet there was a spark of life still inside them. "Hey, can you hear me?" Jake called softly as he knelt down beside her. He wasn't sure if she could understand him, but it felt right to speak. She didn't respond at first. Jake felt a pang of worry. He'd seen injuries before, and he knew that some could be fatal if left untreated. He quickly checked her wounds. A deep gash on her arm had bled heavily, and there was a bruise across her cheek that was starting to swell. Jake didn't hesitate. He opened his water canteen and gently tilted it to her lips. She drank slowly at first, too weak to do more than sip, but after a few moments, she seemed to gather enough strength to drink more eagerly. "There you go," Jake said, his voice soothing. "Just a little more." When she stopped drinking, her eyes fluttered open. She looked at him with confusion, but there was something else in her gaze too, a mix of fear and gratitude. She tried to speak, but her voice came out in a weak whisper. "Thank you," she murmured, her lips trembling as she struggled to keep her eyes open. Jake could feel his heart soften. "It's okay. You're gonna be fine," he said, though he wasn't sure how he could make that promise. He helped her sit up a little, careful not to hurt her further. "What happened to you? Who did this?" The girl winced as she shifted her position, and Jake noticed the way she looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. Then, with great effort, she spoke again. "Wounded. They left me." She winced in pain as she spoke, clutching her side. Jake frowned. "Who left you?" "What's your name?" She looked at him for a long moment as though considering whether to trust him. "Ayanna," she said softly. I am Apache." Jake's mind raced. An Apache? He knew the stories. The tensions between settlers and the Native American tribes in the West were infamous. There had been conflicts, battles, and misunderstandings. A cowboy like him, helping an Apache girl. It didn't sit right with some people. He had heard stories of the Apache warriors and their fierce loyalty to their tribe, but never had he expected to find himself in the position of helping one of their own. Still, he wasn't one to judge someone based on their heritage. Ayanna needed help, and that's all that mattered right now. "I don't want trouble, Ayanna," Jake said quietly, looking around to make sure no one was watching. He wasn't afraid of the Apache, he had respect for them. But he knew that if others found out he was helping her, it could lead to serious consequences. "I'll get you to safety. You'll be all right." But to his surprise, Ayanna looked at him, her eyes filled with something unexpected. "You have saved me," she said, her voice now stronger, though still faint. "In my tribe's law, you are my husband now." Jake blinked, taken aback. He'd heard of arranged marriages, but this was different. "What do you mean?" he asked, confusion settling in his mind. Ayanna's gaze didn't waver. "In my tribe, when someone saves a life, it binds us together. You gave me water. You helped me. You are now my husband, according to our laws." Jake was stunned. He didn't know what to say. He was no expert on Apache customs, but this was something he had never imagined. Marriage by obligation, bound by an act of kindness. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of it. "Wait a minute," he said slowly, still unsure of what she meant. "I don't even know you. I just gave you water." Ayanna didn't seem to understand his hesitation. "In my tribe it is the way," she explained softly. "It is the law. You saved me, so you are my husband." Jake looked at her in disbelief. "You're saying just because I helped you, that makes us married?" Ayanna nodded solemnly. Yes, I belong to you now. Jake had never thought of marriage as something that could happen so quickly, so unexpectedly. He had always seen it as a choice, something to be entered into willingly. But Ayanna spoke with such certainty, such trust in her tribe's laws, that Jake felt a strange sense of responsibility settle on his shoulders. I didn't ask for this, he muttered, more to himself than to her, but Ayanna's calm gaze didn't shift. She simply nodded as though the matter was settled. Jake sighed, feeling the weight of the situation pressing on him. He wasn't ready for any kind of marriage, he had no time for that kind of life. But he had promised to help her, and now it seemed that promise had become something far more complicated. But first he had to get her to safety, and then he would figure out what to do next. He helped Ayanna onto his horse, his mind still spinning with the strange turn of events. She leaned heavily against him as they began their journey toward the nearest town, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the canyon floor. As they rode, Jake couldn't help but glance at Ayanna. There was something about her, a quiet strength, a resilience that kept him wondering about her story, about the life she had left behind. He had no idea what lay ahead for them, but he knew one thing. Nothing would be simple anymore. Their lives were forever changed, and Jake wasn't sure where the road would lead them. But for now, he was committed to seeing her safe. Whatever came next, he would deal with it, one step at a time. Jake rode steadily, his horse's hooves making soft thuds on the dry earth. Ayanna clung to him, her head resting against his shoulder. She was still weak from the wounds, but there was something about her quiet strength that kept Jake from feeling like a complete stranger to her. She trusted him, and though he hadn't asked for it, he found himself bound to her by more than just the customs of her tribe. The ride was slow as they made their way through the rocky terrain. Jake glanced at her from time to time, her face still pale from the pain, but her eyes held a calmness that he found strangely comforting. She had endured so much, yet she carried herself with grace. He wondered what kind of life she had lived before the attack. Who had she been before all of this? Ayanna? Jake asked softly, breaking the silence between them. How did it happen? The attack, I mean. Who did this to you? Ayanna shifted slightly, looking away from him as if the memories were painful to relive. After a long moment she spoke, her voice low but steady. They were men from a rival tribe, she said softly. They attacked my people. My father fought back, but... Her voice trailed off, and Jake could see the sadness in her eyes, the grief that lay just beneath the surface. They killed him. They left me behind, to die. Jake felt a deep sense of anger building inside him. The idea of someone hurting a defenseless person, especially a woman who had done no wrong, stirred something in him. He clenched his fists around the reins. He wanted to say something, but the words didn't feel like they would be enough. Instead, he simply nodded, trying to convey his sympathy without overstepping. I'm sorry, Ayanna, he said quietly. No one should have to go through that. Ayanna didn't respond right away, but after a few moments she looked up at him, a small, grateful smile on her lips. I know. You are kind to me, Jake. That is why I trust you. Jake's chest tightened at her words. It was strange how quickly things had changed. Just hours ago he was a man on his own, with no ties to anyone. Now he was bound by duty by a bond that he didn't fully understand. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized he couldn't turn his back on her. Not now. As they rode on, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the land. It was clear they were approaching a small settlement. Jake could feel his nerves start to tense. How would the townspeople react to Ayanna? Would they see her as a victim or as someone dangerous? And what about his marriage to her? What did that mean, really? The questions swirled in his mind, but before he could dwell on them too much, they arrived at the edge of the town. Jake dismounted first, then helped Ayanna down. She looked around, her eyes wide with uncertainty. This was a place she didn't know, a world that was very different from the one she had grown up in. Jake could see the discomfort in her expression. She wasn't used to the town, and he could only imagine how out of place she must feel. He placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a small, reassuring smile. It's okay, Ayanna. You'll be safe here. She nodded, though she still seemed unsure. Jake led her toward the small doctor's office, hoping that he could get her some help. The door creaked as they entered, and the dusty smell of the room made Jake's stomach turn. The doctor, a middle-aged man with graying hair, looked up from his desk in surprise. Can I help you, son? The doctor asked, his eyes flicking to Ayanna with interest. I found her out in the canyon. Jake explained quickly. "She's been wounded. I need you to look at her." The doctor studied Jake for a moment before nodding. "Of course. Bring her here." Ayanna was hesitant, but Jake gently urged her forward. She hesitated again before sitting on the edge of the examination table, still clutching the side of her dress to cover the cuts and bruises. The doctor quickly began to work, cleaning the wounds on Ayanna's arm and examining the bruise on her face. Jake watched closely, trying to hide his concern. Ayanna winced with each touch, but she never cried out, never showed more than a flicker of discomfort. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor stepped back. "She's in a lot of pain, but she'll heal. Just needs rest and some medicine." Jake let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Thanks," he said, shaking the doctor's hand. "How much do I owe you?" The doctor waved him off. "No charge for saving a life. But you might want to keep her here for a couple of days just to make sure she gets back on her feet." Jake turned to Ayanna, who was still sitting quietly, her hands folded in her lap. He could see that she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. He didn't want to leave her here alone, but at the same time, he knew she needed to rest. "I'll be right here," Jake promised her. "You just get some sleep. I'll stay close." Ayanna nodded, her eyes closing as she sank back against the pillow. Jake stayed by her side for a while, watching over her, making sure she was comfortable. The weight of the situation felt heavy on his shoulders. He had promised to help her, and now he had to figure out what to do next. He couldn't just leave her, not after everything they'd been through together. And then there was the matter of their marriage. What did it really mean? Was it just a custom to her people, or had it somehow become real? Jake didn't have answers, but one thing was clear. Ayanna had placed her trust in him, and he wasn't about to let her down. As the hours passed, Jake found himself thinking about his life. He had always kept to himself, never forming any deep bonds with anyone. But now he found himself tied to this woman, this stranger in his life, by a promise and a custom. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure he wanted to face it alone. The next morning, Ayanna woke to find Jake still by her side. Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment there was a quiet understanding between them. She had trusted him, and now he was beginning to trust her in return. The future was uncertain, but whatever it held, they would face it together. Jake was starting to realize something. This wasn't just a chance meeting. Something had changed between them, something that couldn't be undone. He didn't know what the rest of the journey would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't leave her behind. Not now, not ever.